What I'd like to do is just remind you how quickly this can move. So the next slide is not a prediction, but it is a way of thinking about how quickly this can change. So this is the UK reported cases per day against time. And you can see running along the bottom there the number of cases over June, July and August, up to roughly 3,000 cases per day or so in September, middle of September. At the moment, we think that the epidemic is doubling roughly every 7 days. It could be a little bit longer, maybe a little bit shorter, but let's say roughly every 7 days. If, and that's quite a big if, but if that continues unabated, and this grows doubling every 7 days, then what you see, of course, let's say there were 5,000 today, it would be 10,000 next week, 20,000 the week after, 40,000 the week after. And you can see that by mid-October, if that continued, you would end up with something like 50,000 cases in the middle of October per day. 50,000 cases per day would be expected to lead a month later, so the middle of November, say, to 200 plus deaths per day. So this graph, which is not a prediction, is simply showing you how quickly this can move if the doubling time stays at 7 days. And of course, the challenge, therefore, is to make sure that the doubling time does not stay at 7 days. There are already things in place which are expected to slow that. And to make sure that we do not enter into this exponential growth and end up with the problems that you would predict as a result of that.
We're not going to get accountability or honesty. Boris Johnson won't even be there today at the press briefing, and I'm told that Whitty and Valent won't be taking questions. So we are moving into a new phase and a slightly weird period, I think. You prorogue Parliament and advertise your willingness to break international law, and yet you want me to trust you with my children's health, my own health, my mother's health. There's a problem here, isn't there? A real problem. But it's not a problem that is in any way eased or helped by shouting at each other. If we can begin from the starting point that we are genuinely all in this together, you don't get an exemption from this. Even if you think it's a hoax, as some of Donald Trump's supporters in America have discovered too late, it can still kill you. So you start from this idea that we're all in it together. And then you acknowledge the numbers suggest that we're about to be bad again. I think that there are some cautious grounds for a little bit of relative optimism, i.e. that the death rate in relation to the infection rate is much lower. But I would suggest to you that that is itself leavened slightly by the so-called long COVID evidence that is now emerging, sticky blood being a phrase that's probably going to become more popular in the coming months. Many people who were outwardly very healthy when they contracted this infection are still months later suffering from all manner of ailments. I'll tell you now that is it very much in the context of what I do for a living, and I'm sure all my colleagues would agree, that is a really interesting well, you'd call it a banker in less cynical circumstances. If you know how we often joke, I think it was Clive Bull's joke originally, that if you can't get the phones to ring on LBC, and this was true in the olden days, it's not really true now, but if you couldn't get the phones to ring back then, which was a thing, it's not really a thing anymore, you would say, is there anybody old out there feeling poorly? Or words to that effect. Now, in the spirit of the stopped clock being right twice a day, if I said now, and I'm not, so don't ring in, if I said now to you that the clocks are right twice a day, if I said now to you that we are going to somehow pull in the same direction, we're all going to be on the same page, I think you'd probably struggle to believe it because you don't know who to trust. And that is where I think we'll begin today. Can we do that? Who are you going to trust? Because I don't think we've got any choice but to trust the chief scientific advisor and the chief medical officer. So I've got two questions for you. And that's not me shouting at you or going, you've got to trust them. That's me saying two things to you this morning. The first is, I don't think we've got any choice as a population. I appreciate they might not be right, or they might not be 100% right, or the calculations that they're making between health and wealth may not be completely transparent. But I don't see how we have any choice. Who else would you trust with this? And that, of course, is where the echoes of Brexit come in. So, for example, you could either listen to the German car industry about what the German car industry was going to do, or you could listen to Digby Pudding Jones. I'd like to think everybody has now learned the idiocy of not listening to the German car industry when you're talking about the German car industry, not listening to Pascal Lamy when you're talking about the World Trade Organization, but listening instead to Andrea Leadsom. We can all see the dangers in this, but that ship has sailed. We'll be dealing with the fallout of that ludicrous period in British history for generations to come. This is alive and now and urgent. And I, as a father, as a husband, as a son, as a brother, as a friend, as a colleague, as a radio presenter, as a journalist, I don't think we've got any choice but to trust the two men that we'll hear from at 11 o'clock today with our safety. I just don't. And I think it's really scary that so many good, wise, thoughtful people listening to this programme right now will already be disagreeing with me. It's after 11 is the time, and it's funny, isn't it, the things that can hit you. The silence there with which that press conference concluded, a really stark reminder of the curious circumstances in which we find ourselves, that the new normal. Got used to seeing it on the telly when the football's on, there being no crowd to speak of, or occasionally false noises, but clearly there was some sort of intuitive sense that should have been greeted with a round of applause or a metaphorical final whistle. So there we are. I mean, clearly the terrifying graph, or at least the graph that is intended to alarm us the most, is the one that sees or predicts what would happen if the current rates of doubling every 7 days were to continue for a few more weeks. It would be the 13th of October that saw daily cases reach just shy of 50,000, 49,000 new cases on the 13th of October if we don't do things designed to bring down that infection rate. 3,105 on the 15th of September, double that every 7 days until the middle of October, and you're back up to 50,000. We'll catch up with Theo shortly. I like those guys. And one of the reasons why I like them, and we'll talk about this together, I think, after we've caught up with Theo, we'll go back to the question of trust with which we began the programme, but I think one of the reasons I like them, and this occurred to me while watching that conference, what's in it for them not to be honest with us? That seems to me to be the question that lies at the heart of much of the madness polluting our nation at the moment. Why would they? What's in it for them? What do they get over the line by not being honest with us? So, I mean, perhaps inevitably, #SackValence is trending on Twitter with #SackWitty. Don't get too depressed about that. You can be top of the trends list at the moment. I don't quite understand why. We're just 2,000 tweets about you. So it's sad to see that there, but it's not necessarily significant. Twitter is not real life. But still, that sense of scepticism, for me, would always, what's in it for them? Why would they lie? I thought this for what it was worth during Brexit. Why would the Bank of England's governor not tell you the truth, whereas somebody who was hitched to a different bandwagon might have a reason to slightly mislead you? So I look at Whitty and Valence, and I know they should have been more critical of Dominic Cummings when he insulted every single one of us in this country. But if they had been, the treatment of Mark Sedwill and others suggests that they probably would have been handed their sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap. We may never have seen them again if they'd come out and told us what they really thought about Dominic Cummings' despicable decision to drive his wife to a beauty spot on her birthday and then pretend it was for an eye test. So you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Nobody's 100% wonderful or 100% awful. There's probably slightly more contenders for the second category than there are for the first. So I don't understand why you wouldn't just listen to the chief medical officer and the chief scientific advisor and think, oh, lordy,